let's just talk a little bit about the purpose of why we're here. So there's sort of 3 points that we're going to cover today. We want to outline the sort of the new, updated, improved CLA purpose and core values. We want to talk a little bit about what's maybe changed since the last few months, since we've had to sort of realign what we're delivering, and then how we're delivering it. So we'll take a look at that. We want to describe what 2021 will look like and how that will be different than other years based on the ever-changing sort of environment of how we can gather together. And then the third point, and really this is probably the most important reason we're here, is we are hoping that this will be the opportunity that sort of motivates you to sign up for the entire conversation series that's going to start on November 3rd. So that's why we're here today. Oop. Let me get out of that. So first, let's just use our chat and check in with one another. We're going to have an opportunity a little bit later to unmute and check in, possibly in person. But for the purposes of just understanding who is in the room besides Carrie Wadig, let's use the chat to introduce yourself with your name and what motivated you to be on this call today, maybe where you're coming in from as well. And we'll use the chat to get a feel for who's with us here today.
And I'll just say, make sure in the chat that it's where it says to, make sure it says everyone, and that you're not
thanks, Barry.
sending it a private message to somebody, for example.
And while you guys are doing that, while we're using the chat, I just want to take a minute to call out the CLA board members who are in the room. So I'll just go around my little Brady Bunch squares. Like I said, Barry and Cheyenne are members of the board. Cheyenne does a lot of our administrative back-end work, so we appreciate her. Barry is the board president. Chris Marion is on the call today. Wayne, how do you say your last name? Waters? I don't want to butcher it.
Woodars.
Okay.
Woodars.
He's on our CLA board as well. Aaron Wolf, James Schneider, who's on the call, Troy Pitts, Carrie Wadig, the real Carrie Wadig, wherever there she is. We also have a couple other members of our board who maybe aren't here with us today. Katie Glass, Josh Camps. I'm trying to think, did I forget anyone else? I said Troy, right? Troy Pitts is on our board. And we have some committee members on here as well. Steve Genoway is on our curriculum committee. And let's see, I'm trying to keep this, using this, these squares is not the easiest for me right now. So I think I mentioned everyone that's part of our CLA board, and we're all, all of us, it's not just Barry and Cheyenne and I that are grateful to have you here. We're all here and grateful that you decided to take your time out of your lunch to come and learn a little bit more about the CLA. So Barry, and anything interesting in the chat? What motivated people to be here today? I see that we've got some alumni who are here.
Certainly, Chris Marion had an influence, I'll say.
She's bringing people in.
Yeah, which is awesome. I think it's great. And a lot of past CLA grads, a lot of people I think that just have known about CLA for a long time and love the organization itself. A couple, or I should say one for sure, that was in our 2020 class that we had to cancel. That's Anne. Yeah.
Great. Jacqueline was in that class as well, and a few others, I think, too, right?
Oh, that's right. Jacqueline was in there as well. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And I see that, there's a variety of, communities people are coming in from as well. So that's excellent.
Yep. So
Barry will continue to help us monitor the chat and all of that information. So we're going to keep on moving. So the agenda today is really, we're going to break this into three parts. We want to talk about where we've been, to give you a little history on the CLA, what it's all about, what it's been about, and why it's, so many people that are mentioning in the chat, they're alumni, why people feel strongly about this program and continue to come back. We want to talk a little bit about where we're going, the future of CLA, and then what we're doing now based on the circumstances we find ourselves in and the work that we've done to figure out where we want to go. What are we going to do about it? And this CLA virtual conversations is the big sort of reveal in that. And we'll talk more about those coming up here. So to kick us off with the history of the CLA, Barry is going to talk a bit more about that.
Good morning still, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. So I'm not going to take too much time. While the history of CLA is important and it sure has a legacy for sure, what's important today is the conversations that we're going to have here in 2021. So I'm going to read just a little bit of history. Most of you probably know some of the history, and if you don't, I encourage you to go out to our website and learn more. So 21 years ago, a task force of extension agents from 3 counties, local university educators, and directors from area chambers of commerce identified a lack of leaders in Southwest Wisconsin. Collectively, they felt by enhancing the number of engaged leaders in our communities, they will be better able to address the declining numbers of volunteers serving on and leading committees, boards, planning teams, and work groups in the communities they live and work in. The task force members recognized that a formal leadership development program was needed to build the knowledge and skills, motivation and confidence, and capacity of the people living in the region. After researching other leadership programs, the task force decided that a collaborative effort, rather than a single community-based program, would make it a more sustainable, drawing on resources and participants from a larger geographic area. To this day, our leadership program, prior to the pandemic, was in person 6 months, 1 full day per month on the last Wednesday of the month. With over 600 graduates of the last 20 years, our plan is to continue to evaluate our program and ensure our content is relevant and that our program is around to provide significant impact to our region for the next 20 years. And let's face it, that's why we're here now, trying to continue what's going on in a time where we're having to do more things, more engagement with people using remote tools and virtual tools such as Zoom. So that's kind of the history in a nutshell. It's causing us to have a little reboot or a pivot, as we were referring it to. And I'll send it back to Julie to further discuss why the change.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, and you know what's amazing about that history, and as I mentioned, some of the people that are on the call, I think Ricky and James and there's others on the call probably as well that have been part of a lot of that history and depth that has been built over the last 20 years of CLA. So we're glad that we have the people in the room that are able to, give us that historical perspective and maintain the sort of, the roots of what the CLA is all about, and bring that forward as we continue to reflect on where we want to go as well. So as Barry mentioned, 20 years, it's been quite a ride, and he touched on it, right? But 2020 really made us pivot. We were dealing with uncertainty and ever evolving circumstances. And, it led to a reflective process for us. We went back to square one to really try and reflect on what are the guts of the CLA so that we can solidly move forward, no matter how we can have to deliver the program, whether it's in person or maybe virtually. What do we want to make sure that is consistent and that's something that doesn't really waver? So we did a process, the board, we went through some work to, let me get back to my next slide so I can get off this. The process to evaluate the purpose of why we're here. And so I'm just gonna, just read this. This is the CLA updated and it's slightly tweaked purpose. The Community Leadership Alliance of Southwest Wisconsin serves those who work or live in Grant, Iowa, and Lafayette counties, and who share the vision of creating a stronger Southwest Wisconsin. The CLA believes the strength of our region depends on relationships, and an eagerness to lead by modeling these core values. So we went back to the drawing board about what we believe, what do we know for sure, and this is what we came up with. This is our purpose. We know who we are going to serve. We know why we're serving them, because we believe in creating a stronger Southwest Wisconsin, and we believe even we know what that entails, which is relationship and a willingness to lead by modeling certain values. And so we're going to read through these values. The CLA core values are we've shorted these up with some definitions, what I'll get into in a second here, but lead from within, value relationship, prioritize community, get your hands dirty, look forward, fail fast. So I'll just quickly go through what we determined what we think that these values mean. So sometimes values are hard to operationalize, and we wanted to put a little bit of context around those. So leaders who lead from within, we're sort of describing that leaders know who they are, they learn who they are, they express themselves, and they offer their gifts. They are intentional, present, authentic, and do the next right thing. They bring energy and passion to all they do. They are all in. Leaders who value relationship, engage, listen, and work collaboratively. They seek diverse perspectives and are open to new ideas. They know everyone belongs here, and they celebrate every story. Leaders who prioritize community inspire, create, and appreciate moments in their communities. They champion the driftless region and all who explore it. They enrich the lives of others in their community. Leaders who get their hands dirty, show up, pitch in, and are empowered. They show up, pitch in, and are empowered. They embrace challenges and act courageously. They take the initiative, they hustle, and they make it happen. Leaders who look forward, fail fast, assess, explore, and think strategically. They ask questions, and we'll go back to that word Barry's mentioned. They ask questions and pivot. They honor resources and learn from every mistake. They reflect on the past as they craft the future. So those are how we've given a little bit more detail and depth to just these, the sort of phrases around our core values. But this is what we got after doing some of that work. We felt like this is what we can start from, no matter how we offer the next iteration of the Community Leadership Alliance. So we shored up what we believe, that our strength, the region depends on relationships. It depends on this eagerness to lead by modeling these core values. And then we kind of weighted against the current state of affairs that we're in, right? And that work led us to this desire to dig a little bit deeper into some of the barriers that seem to be facing our in dividing homes and neighborhoods and communities. And with all of that considered, it didn't feel just quite right to offer the same programming in 2021, with the only difference being we're going to do it on Zoom. So, and Barry mentioned the word relevant before. We wanted to stay relevant and understand through the eyes, ears, and hearts of those who live and work here in Southwest Wisconsin. And we wanted to be able to explore together what we are hearing and we're seeing and we're experiencing locally and in our state and across the country, because we start with the belief that these conversations, by understanding that, can lead to individual leadership growth as well as communities that can thrive and progress. So that's why we're here today. We're preparing to explore discussions that deepen our understanding of one another, on how to truly build community and how to model leadership. And we're doing that with what we're calling our CLA 2.1 conversations. So 2.1 is sort of a play on the year. It's a play on a reboot, right? So our 2.1 conversations are what we're going to get into next. That's, where we're going. So we're going to just talk quickly about a basic framework for these conversations. We're going to talk about the ground rules that everyone sort of has to agree and commit to if we're going to be doing these in a productive way. We want to talk a little bit about the model that we're going to be using for every discussion going forward to keep us all sort of aware of what's coming next and how we're going to get in deeper to the conversations that we want to have. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the possible topics that will be threaded throughout all of the 9 sessions that, like I mentioned before, start on February 3rd. Then we will be opening up. We can have conversation about what you're hearing, thoughts or questions that you have. So let's get into the ground rules that we are wanting everybody to commit to as we go forward in these conversations. So the conversations require that participants do the following things. I'm going to take a drink here. Hold on one second before I start coughing loudly. Conversations require participants to examine ideas, thoughts, feelings, and do that both individually and collectively. Participants create conditions for everyone to feel seen and heard. Participants will try it on. If you've got history with the CLA, you heard Paul Arogi, I'm sure over the years, talk about trying it on, which is taking perspectives. Participants will express themselves using I statements coming from an experience, personal experience point of view. Participants will use a beginner's mind. Beginner's mind is, curious, open to possibility. People that use a beginner's mind are try hard to not be bound by rigid conditions, and they drop expectations or preconceived ideas about something. Participants will honor people and their lived experiences. Participants will call in versus call out. A little bit of information about that would be, calling in involves conversation, compassion, and context. It doesn't mean that we ignore harm or we don't ignore things that we want to bring light to, but we don't come at things in a combative way. We call in conversations. And participants commit to keeping information confidential unless permission to share is granted, or what we call James called the Las Vegas rule, right? What happens in these conversations stays in these conversations. Unless you hear something from someone and you say, hey, I would really love to talk about your story. Do you give me permission to share? So these are the ground rules that we're going to ask anyone that signs up for the conversations that are going to go forward to commit to learn about, to dig in on. We know that some of these ground rules are not, these are new things people are hearing. And that will also be part of the learning, which is how do we call in versus calling out? We're probably trained in calling out. We know how to do that. It seems pretty easy. It's modeled all the time. But how do we learn how to call in? How do we learn how to try it on? If you guys have questions in the chat, I'm not really monitoring the chat. So Barry, you just interrupt me, or Cheyenne, if there's something that you want to address right away.
I'm monitoring the chat. All good.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So those are the ground rules that will apply to every one of our conversations going forward. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the model that we're going to use. So the model is basically the agenda, the flow of all of those conversations going forward. So we will do a check-in similar to today, except we will not do it in a chat. We will do it in a small group. This small group check-in is really a way to build relationships with the people in the space, in the room. A lot of times that will be initiated with a question, some sort of question or idea that probably threads through the idea that we talked about either at the last session or some other provocation to get us grounded in the work we're going to do today, and maybe revisit some of the work we did before. We will have the topic, which is the idea that we're going to discuss that day. The topic, or the part of this part of the agenda, will be where we introduce local leaders, local storytellers, experts that come in and are going to share some of what they are passionate about or have expertise in, to get us thinking about a certain big question for the day. So the topic will lead to the next part, which is the big question. Excuse me. The big question is basically a transformational question that hopefully encourages participants to connect to the topic, to connect their lived experiences, and also the relationship between community leadership. What you've heard, the question will hopefully bring that together. We will transition from the big question into our conversations. And that we're going to use a 3-part sort of cadence for the conversations. We're going to first have an individual reflection time where you're doing some of the, I've heard about this topic now. I've heard it 20 minutes or so. They've given me this question. What's coming up for me? How do I feel? So it'll be a reflective time. We will then break into the bulk of the conversation area, which is small groups. So within 3 to 5 people will be coming together in a small group scenario using Zoom's breakout functionality, and they're going to discuss deeper what's coming up for them, how it's engaging for them based on their life experiences or live experiences, what this idea means to them, and having that conversation within a safe small group where we can be really digging in on things. And then the last part of the conversation section is when we regroup. We'll come back together as this community of learners and talk about summarize what the groups were talking about, what came up in this group. And oh my gosh, we didn't even think about that in our group. We went in this direction, and be able to sort of summarize all of the learning based on all of the members of the group. After the again, that conversations bullet point 4 is going to be the depth. The most time will be spent in those conversations. We'll come back together after we summarize, and we'll talk about what's next. What's next section will be some curated information that helps you build onto what you've been learning, or that maybe will prime you for the next discussion. We will introduce maybe some articles or videos or things that you can do outside of the conversations. And we'll also direct you to things like a private Facebook page, which we're going to put together, so that we can keep having these conversations once our 90 minutes is up in the Zoom setting. The topics that will thread through all of these conversations are things like, and these really have not changed from the CLA, in the last 20 years, things like trust building, awareness, self-awareness, active listening, setting boundaries, understanding bias, accountability, creating shared vision, systems thinking, continuous improvement, building resilience, authenticity, communication, and healthy tension. So all of the topics will, like I said, will be threaded through these conversations that we start with the topic, and that we dig into with these big questions that we're going to talk about. All right, so I'm going to just take a second here, make sure I've covered everything I want to cover, because now it's time to open it up for thoughts and questions related to what you've seen. I think you can ask or discuss anything, but specifically, if you have questions about the values, about the work that we've done to get the CLA sort of solidified with the where we're going kind of initiative work that we did with the purpose and the values, or if you have conversation or questions about the conversations themselves, we'd love to open it up with that. I'll give you a few details that might still be lingering. The plan is that we have 9 90-minute conversations on our schedule. They start on February 3rd, and they are every other week from 11:30 until 1 p.m. The registration works that you would register for all of them, so you would be able to get all of these conversations for the one registration price. We plan to record the sessions during the topic time, so the content that the expert brings in is recorded, but the small group breakouts will not be recorded. So we'll be able to use that topic and the big question. If you aren't able to make it someday, we will be able to put that into a place where you can sort of visit it on demand. It will be your on-demand content. And like I mentioned before, there will also be ways to connect using Facebook and other maybe after-hours Zoom events that participants will be able to take advantage of as well to continue to have these conversations. The 90 minutes is just the starting place for a lot of these conversations. It's our hope and our belief that that will just be the spark, and these conversations will continue to come up. And so we want to make sure that we're there to support and to continue to deepen those conversations in the weeks between the Zoom calls and then even beyond this 9-week session. So with that, I'm going to be quiet. And I want to open it up to questions, comments. And I think that this won't just have to be for me. We have our entire board and the curriculum committee on here as well. So what questions do you have for us?
Julie, I was working on chat and some people coming in and whatnot. Did you talk at all about the potential for doing some one-off sessions and the discussion about maybe doing some happy hours that we talked about?
I did mention the potential for some after hours Zoom calls or things like that. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you call it a happy hour, it sets a tone, though. I like that. You know, and I think that's one of the things we talked about too, is we want to make sure that this is an enjoyable experience for people as well. We want this to be casual. We want this to be a relationship building, because that's always been one of the strengths of CLA, is you're working with other people, meeting other people who are in a similar situation to yourselves, who are interested in making Southwest Wisconsin a better place, who are committed to action as a result of their desires to do that. And it's not confrontational. I hope people also walk away from these saying, I wonder how I can apply this same sort of online situation with other groups. You know, one of the things that the pandemic has taught us is that we can't schedule or depend on when we're going to go back to either a normal or a new normal. That doesn't mean we don't go ahead and do things. That doesn't mean we stop interacting with each other. We just have to adapt to how we do this. And I hope that we're going to be modeling and learning more about how to do this more effectively. And you can take and do that exact same thing or something similar in your community as well.
Yeah, thanks, James. I'll just say the model that we're using is actually something that has been tested before. So I do think that if you're interested in deepening conversations in your workplace, within your, church, your like whatever it might be, and Zoom is what you have, the model that we're presenting has worked for another group in the past. We believe it's going to work for this group. So there is absolutely some skills and facilitation that you're going to see and witness that you can probably apply immediately into how do we have conversations of depth in this virtual world, which, is, I think, to James' point, the new normal might, people aren't going to be driving like they probably used to, right? If we now have this functionality. And so these are good skills to have as well. What questions or thoughts does anyone have?
So I'm going to bring something up, but I'll just say that we will, even though it's really difficult, be very intentional about sometimes sitting in silence during these conversations, because we want you to sit in that silence and maybe some uncomfortable thoughts or whatnot to encourage you to open up. Like I said, or like we have talked about as a committee, we aren't going to call anybody out. We aren't going to call on people to share your thoughts. How these are conversations, so you share when and if you're willing to share at different times. But what I'll say, and something that Julie and I have had some conversations, and if you're wondering, what do I get out of this? And the best way that we can answer this is that what you'll get out of this is what you're willing to put into it. So in other words, if you're willing to reflect, if you're willing to dig deeper into things that maybe make you uncomfortable during these conversations, those things are important for each one of us to do. And so what you'll get and what you'll learn and how you'll grow from these conversations are a direct result of what you're willing to do, and what work you're willing to do, if you will, outside of just these conversations.
I'm going to take the fact that the questions are coming in slowly as kudos that I must have described it impeccably, which, come on. I don't want to put anyone on the spot since Barry just said we weren't going to do that. But Chris Marion, as a member of our board and as a member of the board who's been in conversations like this through the other group, do you want to, I mean, is there anything you could add about people that maybe have hesitation about, like, I don't know, this feels a little uncomfortable? Could you give any thoughts about that might ease people, or anyone else who's been in conversations like this that would want to just discuss what their experience has been like in those conversations?
Sure. Well, I love CLA. I loved the original CLA. I've been on the board and I've loved every iteration of CLA. And I really love this idea that we're actually, I think, going to be able to get more intimate than we could even if we were together. I know that a lot of people don't feel that way, but I think Zoom is kind of magical. And I think there's something about being able to be in people's bedrooms and offices that's really unique. And I think we're all trying to build things in our own communities, and sharing and learning the tensions and the challenges, knowing who's out there working, across the border from you is really valuable. And if you have any hesitation about signing up, I would just say it's an opportunity to be in conversation with like-minded people who might have real differences of opinion, but nevertheless are like you in that they want to be builders. And so that's why I'm always showing up for everything CLA and inviting people as well.
And I think, Chris, you just modeled what Julie was talking about, being first person. What is your experience? What's your reaction to something? And that's a lot easier to do when we go into the small groups of 4 or 5 people, discussion groups. And what also we'll have in there is we'll have a facilitator in each. And it's not going to be somebody directing the conversation, but just making sure that there's people are involved and feel comfortable with it. And it's not just throwing you into a room and saying, talk about this. There'll be some questions that are conversation starters, and we'll make sure that we address those and get people going. After you do a couple of these, there'll be no problem starting any of these, because people will be off to the races going, well, this is what I think about that, or here's what's happening in my community, or here's what in my business, what this particular topic means.
James, that's a great segue into the question that Denise had in the chat.
Yes.
I think about what the topics we're planning to present. So, I mentioned some of the topics that will sort of be threaded through every one of the conversations, building trust. I believe we're going to have someone who's gotten some serious training in trust building at our first session. I don't know if Barry was able to confirm her or not.
Not confirmed yet.
But she's trained by one of the leading sort of experts in the nation about how you build trust in community, to help people really feel like they belong within your organization or your family or your community. So I would say, trust building, self-awareness, those are all active listening, bias, setting boundaries, some of the things I mentioned. those are all going to be threaded through. But I think the topics will depend, because we might have, if you're familiar with the CLA, we've had area leaders, let's say, that have done work on particular projects. I know James has a colleague and a friend who many years ago did work on a recycling initiative and worked with a community member on that. We may bring him in to talk about that story, and we're able to tie that story back to multiple things and thread that together. So sometimes it's going to be experts on particular topics, and other times it might be a member of your community telling their story and what they learned from that, and how they were able to build community, or how they were able to model certain values. So I think the topics, all of that sort of threads through how we're planning to present and use that topic time to really not just be sort of a curriculum-based thing, this is what you're going to learn, but really, like, let's bring in all of the beautiful sort of diversity of these stories and these opportunities of people here in Southwest Wisconsin, and what can we learn from them. Does that, Denise, I gave you a non-answered answer, so sorry, and you're welcome. But the things that you will see threaded throughout are accountability, systems thinking, continuous improvement, building authenticity and resilience, trust, self-awareness, and how those are presented are the different vehicles are it's going to be a diverse way to share those and to bring those into every conversation. That's a great question. Thank you.
Does anyone need more detail? And not that we have it all figured out in regards to topics and within some of these overarching themes that Julie talked about, there's certainly lots of things that fit underneath that. And not that we're going to be prescriptive for sure, but we want this to be a conversation. That's why we're calling it that. But if anyone feels like they need more information there, don't be afraid to ask. And if you've been out on our website, Julie and I tried to do a conversation about, what these things might feel like and look like. Certainly feel free to listen to that. It's about 16 minutes.
I see one other comment that somebody made about CLA graduates, if we want to have past graduates attend. And the answer is absolutely yes. We're specifically reaching out to past graduates. We think it's a chance to use some of the expertise that people who have gone through the program and who are practicing leadership in whatever role that they currently have to share not only how this has helped them, but how they learned and grew as leaders, not just through CLA, but through other things that they're doing as well.
Yeah, I thanks, James, for catching that. I think that that's absolutely the case. I think one of the things that when we did realign on the CLA and what we valuing relationships is one of our core values, right? Or prioritizing relationship is our value, relationship, prioritize community. That's how it goes. But one of the things that has been sort of a miss for us and a conversation that we've been having for years that I've been circling around the CLA is how do we keep alumni engaged? And we think that this opportunity for these conversations can re-engage alumni to get back involved with the CLA, to be able to contribute, to be able to sit, in conversation with new members of the CLA and new people that are interested, so that we can all be learning and growing together. So I think that that's probably one of the most exciting parts for me, is that anybody who's been familiar with the CLA, had a great experience, or not, maybe it wasn't really for me. This might be a way to get back engaged, to build relationships and to model some of those leadership values that we talked about before. So basically then the next question is the big question for today. The transformational question is, will you join the CLA 2.1 conversations? Will you take the risk, the initiative to be a part of these conversations. And if you're unsure, Barry and I wondered about 3 questions that might help you think about this. You know, are you willing to invest time, energy, and money on behalf of your community? Well, most of you are willing to do that. You've done that before. You've been part of the CLA. You're taking your time right now. So many of you would say yes to this, right? Are you interested in deepening your understanding of leadership, effective leadership, and becoming more self-aware in how your relationship is to leadership? Again, most of you would say yes to this. You're leaders in your organizations, you're leaders in your homes and communities. And I think then the biggest question would be, are you willing to be vulnerable? Are you willing to be uncertain? Because this is new. This is an experiment for us, just like an experiment for all of you. Are you willing to take the risk, right? Are you willing to be a little bit sort of, emotionally sort of vulnerable? You're putting yourself out there because these are going to be conversations where we're not going to make anyone, but we're hoping people will bring their lived experience and themselves, because your stories matter. Your stories are valuable to not only our CLA conversations, but they're valuable and important to our communities and how we're going to continue to move forward. So we're hoping that the big question, the transformational question, if you're willing to join the conversation series, we hope the answer to that is yes. And we have a couple more details here for you to think about. So you can register today. Barry, I think, is going to put the registration in the chat as well. Our next conversation will be at the same time, 11:30 to 1. We're going to be done a little bit early today, which is perfectly okay. Like I mentioned, there's bigger things going on right now in the country. But on February 3rd, we're going to start our first conversation using the model that we discussed. Watch for your inbox. We're going to have a follow-up email. We're going to put a little bit more about our ground rules. I've got an article that talks about calling in. So you can read and can prime yourself for what that might look and sound a little bit like. And then you can visit our website. You can check out the podcast that Barry and I, like I said, put together. You can check out the rest of the website and you can find the registration there. So I guess if there's nothing else, I'm looking at the screen now. If there's nothing else from our board or Barry, you can have.
Cheyenne put the registration link out there, the one that you're seeing on the screen right now. Thank you, Cheyenne. I appreciate that. No, I don't. I really don't have any other thoughts. I'd love to have people join. It's open to everyone. We say you belong here because you do, and that's how we want to make you feel. And that will be our goal. And so hopefully people want to be a part of it.
I hope that all of you will see you back here on February 3rd. If you have questions, I'll stay on the Zoom, Barry, and maybe the board members can stay on the Zoom. If someone does have an individual question you feel more comfortable asking, please do that or send us a chat. But with that, I want to just thank you all for being here, and we'll see you on the 3rd.